Have y'all done podcasts before?
No.
First time? So you're all over YouTube.
I am?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've seen a few interviews.
A little too much.
A little too much. Okay. Oh, that's right, because of the TV show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're on a TV show?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's on ethics and religion.
Yep.
Okay. Well, you must have done good, huh?
I guess so. They keep asking me to come back.
Yeah.
You have a good look, too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Both of y'all.
Yeah.
I mean, a little bit.
Well, Dr. Trovall, Dr. Reese, thank you so much for doing the podcast. Apologies about how long it took for us to set up.
No worries.
No worries at all.
It allowed Bruce to be here with us.
Yes. Yeah, we're a pleasure since this is your area of expertise, I guess. But so we wanted to talk about critical race theory and learn about it. It's a hot topic issue in the state of Texas right now. Well, not just in the state of Texas, but I know in Texas specifically, they're banned, or the politicians have banned it K through 12, and there's a big push to ban the teaching or any mention of the teaching in higher education. Before we dive into that, can y'all introduce yourselves and get your credentials before we dive off into talking about specifics?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Carl Trovall, and I am I'm a professor of ethics and history here, and my area is religious studies, so it's primarily religious ethics.
Awesome.
And I'm Bruce Reese. I'm the director of the criminal justice major and the sociology major here at Concordia.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure. So I'm going to tell you my dummy version of critical race theory. We were talking about it in an earlier podcast, and tell me and shoot holes through it, and then we can kind of dive off into it. But what I assume critical race theory is the teaching of how racism is not just an individual belief, but it was strategically embedded in our pillars in society, whether it's criminal justice, whether it's our corporations. It was strategically embedded, and that's why it's hard for us to get out of racism in general. Is that fair, or how would y'all define it?
I thought that was decent.
Okay.
It has a lot
Good job, John.
Decent.
Yeah, it has a lot of very strong foundational points of it.
Okay.
I think one of the starting points with critical race theory is one that it's a theory and within the name, but the critical part actually is really important as a category of theories. So there's multiple critical theories, and race is just one of the many critical theories that are out there. So it plays into that. There's other aspects that you're talking about that influence how society works outside of race. Race is just one of those elements, but there's other social constructs and other factors that also play into our everyday interactions that were foundationally put in to create different stratifications and different inequalities in society. So yeah, I think the starting point oftentimes is dealing with critical race theory as a critical theory, and starting there to build into race being one of the many critical theories that we could talk about. And I think that's important too, because critical race theory being under scrutiny and being talked about and debated about oftentimes is limiting the critical lens that it falls under. It's just focusing on this one aspect, when theorists would say it's just one thing. It's just, you're just seeing the needle in the haystack, really, of things that might impact us and influence us in society. So I think that's important to think about critical race theory as one of many critical theories. And I think that's oftentimes missed with the theory overall.
Okay.
I think the other thing is that even people who are experts in critical race theory disagree with one another about what critical race theory is. Mm-hmm. So that any of us, and this is not my area of study, and I have a definition of it, but it's only because I'm looking at various people who tried to define it. And you see differences in those definitions. What is common is that it is critical. In other words, it's about a very complex human humanly constructed, not just institution but idea. Let me give you an example doesn't have to do with race, but let's say capitalism. Well, capitalism is humanly constructed. It's a way we do economics. But critical means is that you look at capitalism and ask, is it doing what the original idea of what capitalism was meant to do is doing? And so you look at it with a critical lens. Because it's a humanly constructed thing, you need to unpack then what it means, and it's very complicated systematic nature, because it isn't just individuals making economic exchanges, it's institutions and groups. And to apply critical theory to racism is this very complicated idea and situation that we found ourselves in historically. And so it's a critical analysis of the history of the situation in which racism has arisen. It's also an analysis of why when I guess I grew up thinking the civil rights movement was going to solve everything. And the reality is that there are certain kinds of racism that persist. The equality that was promised in the civil rights movement, even though there were radical changes, didn't fix racism. So critical race theory is also this tool by which you look at how legal structures, educational structures are still perpetuating racism in our society, even unintentionally perpetuating it.
This podcast episode is brought to you by BCN Supplements. Mike and I have teamed up with BCN, and we're so excited about it. Now, if you're new to the fitness world or you're just starting to get in, BCN has legitimately everything you're looking for. Whether you want healthier hair, skin, nails, if you want to get a good pre-workout drink, or if you want a vitamin, BCN has what you need. One of their products I love is their collagen mix. It's legitimately so easy to use. I know what you're thinking, why is a guy taking collagen? But it helps with everything. Muscle recovery, muscle mass. It helps with your hair, skin elasticity, and you can take it with anything. You can put it in water. You can put it in pancake mix. I take protein pancake mix, so I like to use it in that. Or you can put it in coffee if you're on the go. Just one scoop is all you need, and you're going to help your hair, your skin, muscle mass, your joints, everything. Head to bcnsubs.com to place your order today, and be sure to use CWJM to receive a whopping 10% off your next purchase. And be sure to check them out on Instagram at BCN Supplements. BCN Supplements, helping build a better you from the inside out. So why is it so scary? Why is one side of the political realm attacking it? Why is it such a hot button issue? Why are parents... do we have an answer for that?
Well, another question: what are the main differences in the two? Because you said there's a dividing belief in just the fundamentals of what it is. So, what are the differences in between the two beliefs?
Well, Bruce, you can help me on this, but just one is that, for instance, I mentioned education, I mentioned legal. Critical race theory originated in legal studies. It's strictly lawyers and legal scholars asking, how come what is it about the laws that we can currently have that, even though they're on their surface not racist or that they're not discriminatory, that the results of even these apparently non-discriminatory laws still result in discrimination? So that's a very legal definition. Well, you can ask this about corporations. You can ask it about education. So that'd be one response.
Yep, and I think that also is just teaming on. It's not just a split. We're in this camp. It's in this camp. It's kind of what it's often like Carl was mentioning, what you're applying it to: law, education, families, correctional systems. So that's where the definition gets a little bit gray in terms of, in application to this, we would define it as such, versus in application to laws and legislation. It might look a little bit different. The scariness of it, I think, has something to do, I personally think it has something to do with a view of an attack on somewhat of our foundations, with the idea that if we address the mishaps of our past, then that's somewhat of a shame on us. it's a black mark on us because we're addressing things that happened historically. But I also think that a lot of the fears about uprisings and revolution stem from maybe a misbelief of what this information could do. Oh, if this information gets in enough people's hands, who knows what'll happen? Who knows what riots will start or what revolution will come from this information. So I think a part of it is this wanting to maintain the status quo, and the more information that challenges it or pushes it or says, hey, we need to revisit this, or like Carl said, civil rights movement didn't solve all of the problems, and we still have work to do, and we still have to address this historically. Like, we have to look at the totality and the big picture. Rocks the boat, and that's sometimes not pleasant for people, or it might take a lot of the boat rocking for them to realize that the waves mean something, or the waves matter. So I think that's part of it, is this hesitancy to address history and address kind of maybe some negative aspects of history. And it's turned into if we can demify it, then we don't have to address it in a lot of ways.
Okay. It's a fairly new theory, right? Like, and can you explain how it's actually taught in schools? Because I don't think everyone who tries to keep up with the news cycle, that's not real clear either. We get a headline and an article saying we need to ban critical race theory in schools. What does that mean? How is it actually taught in public education?
First of all, I really genuinely do not believe that you can teach critical race theory in K through 12 schools. It's just way too complicated. It's something that I spent here now a couple of days trying to prepare a little bit for y'all, and I really don't have. I have ideas and concepts, but to me, to imply that you can teach that in K through 12 education, I think is silly. I think that one of the problems that people is they conflate the teaching of the history of racism in America with critical race theory, and those are two completely separate subjects. It's not that they don't help one another. Critical race theory depends upon people's history and context to make a decision about how it affects the people. But teaching about racism and what happened in the South in the 1960s, well, in the North too. I mean, my grandfather was a member of the KKK because they had sundown laws. They didn't allow any black. I'm from Minnesota, and it's like I was surprised to hear that about my grandfather. I didn't think the KKK was in Minnesota and was all over, right? And so I realized, wow, my ancestors are a part of this systematic denial of people having the freedom to be in a place that they wanted to be. I'm getting off track a little bit, but I guess my point here is that I think that kids in Minnesota learning that information is really important for them because that will help them make good decisions later. It will help them think about who they are. And if you don't face that stuff, you can't change it. If you're not aware of something, you can't change it. And if we deny people learning some of this stuff, and I think the problem is the conflation. It's not critical race theory.
Yeah, and I'll tee off on that a little bit more too. So, for example, learning about Rosa Parks, right, would be a historical something you'd hear in a K through 12. And I guess it just depends on how far you go. If you say, here's a situation, Rosa Parks sat on a bus, she got arrested, it started this boycott, and that historically happened, and in a bubble, you can address that. I guess where critical race theory comes in is to say, why couldn't she sit anywhere on the bus? What was in place? Why did people feel like they had to have those laws? What did those laws accomplish? So critical race theory, I think, expands on just us looking at what we can clearly see. We saw she was on the bus. We saw she got arrested. We all know that. That's history. The critical race gets into what were the driving forces, what were the bigger precautions and elements that created that individual situation in history. And again, I don't know if elementary schools and K through 12s are deeply getting into it, but when they start to get into it, when they start to expand on just beyond the history and beyond the basic story, which is critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it kind of delves into the CRT that people are like, whoa, let's just tell the story. Let's not get into the depth of it behind it a little bit. So I think that's a big distinguishing factor between the two.
Ironically, I find that the resistance to critical race theory actually confirms the theory itself.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. And the reason is that critical race theory says that there's always going to be power relationships in society, not critical, just critical theory. There are power relationships in society. And we gain power through wealth and influence and who we are and where we're at educationally. And because we have power, people who have power, including myself, don't really want to give up power, right? And so the question is, if we're going to have a more just society or a more egalitarian society, it means that probably people, I mean, I don't think everything's a zero-sum game, but when you restructure the rules to be fair for everyone, the person who's always benefited from the rules as they were is going to resist.
Yeah.
And so the resistance to me, I am going, why the resistance exactly? Is this threatening? Why is it threatening? You're actually maybe confirming that there's something underneath the hood here that we need to explore even more. Do you have interest in the legal system being exactly the same as it always has been when we can maybe make improvements in it? So that's kind of the question I ask. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And we're getting deep into this. I want to make sure like the listeners and viewers know like critical race theory. I mean, is this an actual class? Is this just sprinkled in the schools? And if you were to remove it, what does that mean? You're taking history out. If you can expand on that a little bit, I'd like to get into that.
Well, I think on the K through 12, I don't think it's not a class. It's like I said, it's more of just maybe an expansion of topical information that's covered in other classes, a social studies, a history, anything that's dealing with the past can access it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to. It's oftentimes dependent on the instructor when their ability or knowledge or comfortability to go deeper than the surface. At the collegiate level, there are critical race theory classes, but I think that's, like I said, it would be one of many critical classes you could take. It's not an emphasis or a standout or a highlight. It would be, here's a bunch of different critical theory classes. Race is one of many. That being said, it is sprinkled, I think, in classes in especially certain fields like sociology, criminal justice, maybe psychology a little bit, where we're getting into why are people doing what they're doing, right? If we're going to tackle that question, that's just one theory, right? It's one of many theories that we might talk about or bring in. It's not like the go-to. It's not like we're going to start with critical race and deal with everything else supplementary. It's kind of given its space as one of many explanations, or one of many that are working together to kind of explain people's behaviors or outcomes or situations we fall into. So it's definitely not a flag planting course of we're going to base everything off of this and everything else is going to work off of it. It's kind of just one of many topics or things that would come up within a course, I would say.
Yeah.
That's a good explanation. Yeah. I think people think it's two sides of the extreme, like take it completely away or don't talk about, don't make that the main topic of discussion. But definitely, like you're saying, like the reason we do the things we do comes from history, and our past generations and the generations passed down to us, have been influenced by, race. So it's interesting. And if they were to be against it, what would you do? Would you just take it out of all those little subclasses? And how would you do that? I mean,
I don't know how you could be a legitimate public, or private institution of higher education and eliminate it. I think you would be, that's a major tool of how we analyze it. You just couldn't teach.
You'd have someone in each class monitoring the teacher.
Well, there's that too.
To make sure that they didn't say something about it.
That happens anyway.
But I guess. But it just, I don't know if it's.
I'm just saying it's a central tool of what it is to be in higher ed. And I don't think it's going to go anywhere because it's going to change and morph over time. Again, I think one piece is that critical race theory, any critical theory, is highly contextual to the situation. I mean, the analysis we make of society today, in 2022 is going to be different than 2042. And so it's going to look very different. That's why to think that it's just one idea or set of ideas or tenets that are kind of eternal and they go through time and they're going to remain the same, that's completely bogus. It's going to morph and develop as time. And then there are going to be schools that split and they'll have differences of opinion. And that's just how higher ed goes. We're constantly moving.
And the critical part about it, just to double back on this, is it, and I find this ironic a lot, is that it's not meant for us. It's not like America only. It's not an American theory that's, well, our society is surrounded on this and that's it. It's a theory that's supposed to be applicable abstractly. So like Carl was saying, it applies to the construct because, like you guys kind of said at the beginning, the foundation had a racial divide to it. Our foundation didn't come with this equality. So unless we start a new foundation, which I don't see us doing at any time as a nation or as a society, we're going to have those grains left in the dirt from when we started planting seeds. So the construct changes over time, but there's going to be this, we were built with this inequality. So to ever think where it's going to be totally extinguished or totally removed from our foundation is a little bit of a stretch or a little bit of high hopes. And I think that's why critical race theory points to that idea that we got to keep this in mind. Not that it has to be the focal point, but again, it can't be banned or just disregarded or tossed out completely in some other ways.
Yeah.
Do we ever get to a point in your eyes where racism or, is not a central topic of discussion? Do we ever, is there ever going to be a peacetime where we get to a point where we don't have to talk about racism?
I have a more absurd answer, so maybe you want to
Go
give
ahead.
it.
No, go ahead. I'll do the absurd answer and then
Let's hear it.
We talk about this in class a lot. One way we talk about this, and again, I'm going to the absurd a little bit, is race divides us, so race would have to bring us together, and it would have to bring us together as a human race against a non-human race. At the point where, again, these differences are, these other things are more important than these things that we thought were different from us. Right? And it would going to be maybe a new foundation where things are changing on a planetary global level, and race is so stupid. Why'd we ever worry about this?
Do you mean historical moments in our time, like 9/11? Do you mean something like that, to where something catastrophic happens and it brings us together?
Yep.
Something like that?
Globally.
Okay.
But
right. You were going towards the other way.
You're going like aliens.
Well,
or something.
well, I mean, that's. I think it's always good to use something absurd like that because it's a thought experiment that makes you think about, okay, let's apply it. So let's talk about 9/11. So I think when you're thinking, first of all, when you understand about what race is, I mean, I think that maybe we should probably define that a little bit, and you help me out here.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Because people don't always understand. They assume that there's these fixed qualities in people. And I mean, it is about a judgment about certain qualities in people that are physical or by appearance. But it's always a social construction, meaning it's always a society's view of what's valuable in a person or not. For instance, we've never had in our history a time in which all the blue-eyed people were able to buy property and all the brown-eyed people were not. It's because even though eye color is a biological characteristic, society said it isn't important. But they look at skin color and they go, oh, but that is. But you see, it isn't the inherence of the skin color that creates racism. It's society's views about what skin color means that is what defines what race is and how we're going to use it. Am I making sense?
No, absolutely.
I'll take it a little step further. So one thing we talk about too with is that historically science is somewhat of a baby. To say that at one point science said there was a scientific difference in race. People who were darker skinned weren't as human, weren't as smart, didn't have the same brain size, didn't have the same abilities to learn, and science backed it up. So historically we have this place where science was pushing these biological differences almost as a pseudoscience, but at the time no one knew that. We didn't have microscopes. We didn't have the technology to be able to look at and understand that we were biologically different, but it's not infecting us as people, right? We still have the same capabilities, the same capacities to learn and to grow and to reach our true potentials. But at one point, science wasn't saying that. And it created a justification for a lot of the racism that we see today because it was backed by science, and then it was passed down from generation to generation to generation in families to say, well, the science book from 1850 said the Negroes have small brains. Right? So part of that social construct was backed by science. And again, it wasn't until science was able to evolve and develop to say, we're all humans. It doesn't matter, right, in terms of your brain size and your brain capacity, your ability to be and accomplish things. But right, it goes back to that foundation, right? That foundation is still there. It's still in families. It's still passed down generation to generation in their stories and their beliefs and their attitudes. So it becomes that social construct that's backed by other elements in society that we have to keep fighting and overturning and say, no, that's not true. That's pseudoscience. That's not real. And we're getting there. But at the same time, you're asking about us being ever equal. Again, we didn't have that foundation. If we had that foundation of maybe some equality, we'd probably be closer to it. But having the foundation of pushing these big differences is going to really make that an uphill battle.
Well, and I want to piggyback on that because since my area is religion, I think the question is why was science even asking the question about race? And the reason is because religion had already been used as a story or a myth about how humans were to understand race. In other words, there's the old story of Noah and his sons, and one of them who moves south to Africa becomes a slave of the other two. Well, look at there, it's right in the Bible. So you have this mythology of, and I mean, I'm not getting into whether Noah's myth or history. My point is the story itself confirmed people's already prejudices, and then science comes along and says, maybe we should explore this scientifically. Well, look at that. Science confirms that too. Yeah. And you see, then all of a sudden you have all these stories piling up, and then this is where the white supremacy originated in the West. And it was only until the 60s that we began to say, this is like not true at all. This is just a completely false story that we're telling. But the problem is that the consequences of telling that story for those hundreds of years have already had great impact on people, and the residual impact continues even today.
So it's interesting to use the science tool back then too. I mean, because I feel like science in general is just being misused. That's the end of the conversation when you says it's backed by science, and in a lot of cases, it does. It helps you explain things, but other things it seems like it's funded a little bit. Yeah, there's another mechanism to it.
Well, science can give you data, but to make meaning, you can't get meaning from science. The humans put meaning on data. And so science helps us ask whether our data is accurate, but the meaning is always constructed by us as humans. And then you ask, are we using it ethically? Are we using this data? I mean, are we constructing meaning in an ethical way, or are we constructing meaning for our self-interest?
And I think especially with race, oftentimes the meaning and the use of it is economics, and having it being backed by science. And again, if we think about ourselves foundationally, we utilized racial differences to say, okay, well, we can put you to work because you're not as smart and you're not as capable. So we can get economic gains based off of the science-backed, religious-backed differences that we don't feel bad about it. And again, we often talk about a lot of the economic gains that come from racism. And it's oftentimes, like Carl said, once you have power and once you have status, it's hard to give up. And if that was based off of indirectly or indirectly racial differences and racial advantages and privileges, it's hard to turn over. It's hard to unpack sometimes. I kind of got to go though, guys.
No,
Sorry.
it was
Am
good.
I cool?
No,
Yeah,
you're good. Yeah, we can take a break. Will, we appreciate you chiming in.
Yes.
It was
Thank
a
you for
pleasure.
having me. This is really great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
I got to go pick up my kids.
We'll take a little break real quick.
Okay.
All right, yeah,
like
Dr. Reese is smart. So Dr. Reese, right?
Yeah, Dr. Reese.
He's a smart guy.
Yeah, yeah.
So remind me again, he's the director for the criminal justice
Program, yeah.
man.
Yeah, and the major here, and also sociology as well. So he's a busy guy.
Couple hats, huh?
Couple hats, because classically criminal justice is in sociology, because it's asking the question about how culture addresses people who don't behave how the society wants them to behave.
Yeah,
that's very interesting.
You need to have that in mind. Go ahead, sorry.
No, you're good. One thing I wanted to ask was the way the world is shaping today. Like my kids, I'm married to a white girl, and so my kids I call them half breeds. That's happening more and more these days. So I think Mike said this on one of our earlier podcasts, but we're going to get to a point where we're mixing each other's races so much where you're not going to be able to tell who's white, who's black, who's Mexican, because back in the day when you were white, and you stayed with white people. Mexicans stayed with Mexican people and vice versa, you know? But the more we're progressing and engaging with each other's races, I think that's going to help racism in general too. Is that...
One would hope,
yeah.
Because I think sometimes the family dynamic allows, when you have intimate personal relations with other people and you have families mixing, that helps. That said, I think one of the myths about that is that we're moving toward it. You know, this was kind of how this idea of, first of all, again, remember, race is socially constructed. So what you believe to be a different group of people is dependent completely upon the history of that culture and what they consider to be important. The reality of genetics of people mixing with one another like that, that's been since the beginning of time. It's always been there. This isn't like there's just been these groups of people who are all been separate, right? Everyone was together at one point. And so this idea of mixing is fascinating, because it's actually how humanity has been structured from the beginning. That's what this idea, well, we're this race, is really not really true. You're just a group of people with a certain genetic set of instructions in you biologically, and whether that's important or not depends upon how your society says, oh, I'm going to define you like this, or I'm going to define you like that. Again, race is socially constructed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that kind of that I've noticed more, so I didn't notice it so much in school. I was kind of slacking off in high school, but we separate, or we put aside a month or a week for, you know, African American month. And, you know, the Hispanic, I think, has a week or whatever. And
yeah, it's in the fall.
Yeah.
This is Women's Month.
Yeah. It's a month.
Is that new?
It's been developing. There have been additions. I mean, there's some that have been recognized by different groups of people for a long time, but in terms of a kind of national recognition in the education system, it's probably a little more newer.
Yeah, I felt terrible, but I saw, you know, they posted the Women's Day maybe, but like then it was Women's Month, and I was like,
I didn't know that.
Man, I've been maybe I haven't been paying attention, but yeah, I guess so. I'm glad you said it's somewhat new. I feel like I'm a little less in the dark.
Yeah.
There's a story that says that the lion always writes the history of the jungle, right? The gazelle does not.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what that means is that whoever's writing the history, you have to ask the question about what interest do they have in writing the history the way that they wrote it.
Yeah.
And the purpose of any recognition of these months is just to get everyone to think, you know, the history is not just the story of the Alamo, right? What about everyone else who was present at the Alamo? I mean, what about Juan Seguin? What happened to the Texicans who were Mexican and helped the Anglo-Northerners fight Mexico, Santa Anna? Well, what happened to them? Once the war was won, many of them got pushed down across the border into Mexico as if they were Mexican, yet they fought on behalf of Texas.
Yeah.
So again, the social construction of race actually ended up making us think differently about, well, who's Mexican, who's not Mexican, who's Texan, who's not. My only point is that these months are an attempt to kind of retrieve the stories that we just haven't typically heard. Yeah. And I'm constantly learning. Tonight we have a speaker here at the university who's going to talk about Coretta Scott King. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing something I've never really heard before, because I don't know about you. I didn't hear anything about Coretta Scott King growing up.
No.
Mm-mm. And this is going to be a huge, broad question, and you can answer however you want. But if we can dive off into that, the quote that you mentioned, the lion writes the story. I mean, and with this topic, what do you think the angle would be? Who's the lion, and why would they write the story this way?
As far as critical race theory,
or just racism in general? Big question, sorry.
No, what's a big? Let me think about it, because again, there are multiple stories afloat, and the stories are not written completely yet. People are still writing them, because we always encourage our students. Your story is so important because maybe no one's heard it. This year we had, for instance, a story called "A Dream Called Home," and it's written by Reina Grande, and she was brought over here to the United States from Mexico. But her dad first left her and then came back and got her and then brought her over, and then she went through the process of getting an education. And this was this account of this immigrant story. And a lot of my students go, wow, that helps me understand the immigrant experience a lot more. I never thought about that, about this particular struggle or this particular thing. Just about even a professor who can't pronounce your name when you get to class, right? They don't know how to pronounce it, and they don't ask you how to pronounce it. They just start calling you what they want, and how dehumanizing that is. It's like, I have a name, and you don't even care about me to even learn my name?
Right.
It's little things like that. My only point is that it's these kinds of stories that we so desperately need to read, not to cancel out other stories, but to at least to give us a full sense of what all the stories are of the different groups of people. And I think that's the power of literature. It's the power of history, too.
Right.
There's some simple history that I didn't know about that I haven't told you yet, though. But like in Pasadena, where we live, like in the Houston area, a long time ago, people from Mexico were segregated in schools.
Oh, really?
You ever hear that?
Mm-mm.
I'm sure you know, but that's new to me, and I didn't know that was a thing. So it's like just little stories that kind of don't surface, and it'd be better if I knew, so I can form my opinion. And I don't know, that's odd.
Well, and there are a lot of those stories out there, and there are books that you could read that when you read them, I'm saying you're going to be pissed off reading them. And the reason you are is because, as I have been reading many stories, it's like, I never heard this story, and I don't know if this is true. I don't know if I trust this person and what they're telling, because it's so harsh and cruel. Wow. Right? Because I learned from a friend, that Texas Rangers, you always hear such great things about the Texas Rangers, but I have a Mexican-American friend who said our family called them the Gestapo.
Wow.
Because they could come in just like the Gestapo did in Nazi Germany, and if they decided you were guilty, they'd take you out and shoot you or hang you. And that was it. There was no jury, because after all, hey,
they're the law.
They're the law,
yeah.
Right? So therefore, I guess, and of course, these are extreme cases, but it's like, oh, wow. Well, I heard one story about the Texas Rangers. This is another one. Now, does that mean every Texas Ranger was a bad guy? I doubt it.
No.
But nevertheless, how can I put it? The problem with groups is that when we get into groups do not sacrifice themselves for the greater good. They tend to want to preserve themselves. And the individuals want to conform to the group to make sure that they're accepted by the group, because the last thing you want to be is isolated from the group. And this is one reason why we have such a hard time, I think, changing, is because if you're a part of a group and you're doing as a group something that, let's say, is unethical, let's take Enron, right?
Right.
It's hard. Who's going to be the whistleblower? Who's going to blow everyone's retirement by saying this? Let's just all just keep quiet, and we'll just huddle in, and we'll just, right?
Right.
And so this happens in the area of race too, right? You huddle around, and you don't want to be that one person who's going against the group. And so that's how all of us become complicit in bad things.
Yeah.
And that can happen in any organization, and it happens in churches too, right? It does, even a purported group of people who are trying to make the world a better place, bad things can happen there because of the same kind of secrecy and need to preserve the group.
Yeah. I want to circle back to the teaching of the African American month, do you think those specific timelines of the teachings kind of negatively impact what could be taught throughout the year, instead of just focusing on, hey, we're giving African Americans a month, or we're giving Hispanic Americans a week? Why can't it be sprinkled throughout the year. And I'm sure it is, but do you think that has a negative impact on some sorts of keeping it separate, more of a divide, like, hey, this month is just dedicated to this race, and this week, this month is dedicated? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that there's a lot of ways to teach history, and I think that would be honestly, maybe it would be better to do it that way if you actually had classes that talked about every different group's kind of perspective of what happened and tell their story. But our textbooks aren't written like that.
Yeah.
So therefore, you have to supplement the textbooks with some other kinds of things, and that's partly why these arise. I suppose if all of that had been taught all along, we wouldn't have the need for that. So in one way, as an ideal, I think that'd be a great way to go. The thing is it's also sometimes nice to highlight different people's history, right? I'm a Lutheran, so around October, we have Reformation. So what do? We very specifically talk about what happened when Luther split from the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church excommunicated him. Well, that's kind of our story, right? Guess what? In Catholic churches, you're not going to hear that story. Well, and maybe you shouldn't. But if I'm doing a history of Christianity class, I'm going to cover all the splits of all the groups.
Right.
I don't know where I was going with that, but.
And as far as public education, higher ed and K through 12, is there, what is the gap? How do we improve the racism subject? How do we actually, because I think we kind of graze over it, but we kind of give dates but we don't really get into it.
Sure. We
don't get into the meat and potatoes of the discussion. How does that improve? And can it improve?
Oh, I think it can improve. Definitely. I'm a hopeful person. I tend to be optimistic on that. I want to go back because I thought of something else regarding the history piece. And that is, when you're sitting in a class, you like to hear the history of someone who looks like you, of someone who you connect with. Could be ethnically, could be gender. I mean, what if you're telling all male stories, right? What about the girls in the class? The boys go, oh, there's someone to model my life after. What about the girls? Where are their models? So I think some of the emphasis of taking these specialized days and moments are to highlight and to give people a sense of pride in their own history, that they have something, that it isn't because their history isn't told that they're nothing. They are something. It's just that their story hasn't been told. And that helps build, I think, community. It helps educate everyone. And if it fosters division, then it's problematic.
Right.
But the goal is that it fosters hopefully community within difference, right?
Yeah.
We remain distinct and different. Can there be? Yeah, I think that racism needs to be handled directly in classes. Now, it shouldn't be soft pedaled, but it needs. I ain't gonna lie. I've gone through personal education in the last 2 years on this topic, and I realized how woefully inadequate I was for all those years. Even though I've had all this education, the last 2 years have been mind expanding and blowing because I realize how I have dehumanized, maybe a strong word, but maybe not respected certain people in my classroom because I was teaching in a particular way or because I handled race in a particularly unhelpful way. And it's scary, it's terrifying. But at the same time, the weird thing is that you have to call attention to race, because if you don't call attention to race, you can never overcome racism. But the thing about calling attention to race isn't to divide, right? It's to bring understanding so that people can come and talk. Mm-hmm. And that's a challenging piece. And I think educators, college profs as well, everyone, I think, needs some education on how to talk about this. Because, this gets into something that, for me, that I was unaware of 2 years ago, except in a very vague sense, is a thing called white privilege. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, yeah.
So privilege is a kind of a set of advantages that come to you just by being white.
Yeah.
It could be being male, too, because there are advantages that come from just being male.
Yeah. I
don't know if you've ever been in a meeting room and, when someone's speaking, they tend to look at all the men instead of the women in the room, particularly if you're in maybe a science board room, right?
We talked with our photographer right before you, and going into an elevator, being a man, you don't have to worry about it if you're with another man, but being a female, that's kind of male privilege.
Exactly. It is male privilege. So there's also white privilege. There are things that accrue. For instance, I have never, ever driven late at night worried that I'm going to somehow be picked up or stopped for a random thing that's going to be in any way threatening to me. Well, I know someone, he spoke here as a prophet, UT, African-American professor. He stopped out in a town in Texas, and people are asking, so where are you going? What are you doing? Well, he's just taking a vacation with his family, just like any of us would. So my white privilege allows me to drive through the town without anyone even bothering with me, but with him, they still stop him, and this wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. Right. Can I play devil's advocate with you real quick on that?
Yeah.
That person who stopped that that individual was just a shitty person.
Fair enough.
Right?
Okay.
Does it mean everyone? Sometimes I think we go overboard with, like with cops, for instance. We demonize cops or the criminal justice system as a whole, when sometimes they're just, and yeah, they may have a lot of bad apples, and there may be a lot of shitty people, but they're held on the microscope a lot more too. One person messes up, everyone's going to hear about it in the United States. Sure. Versus a professor maybe messes up, it's just going to be held in the college. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Is it just if one person messes up, then we kind of demonize everyone as a society on that. And then we bring up like white privilege. Well, that's white privilege because I don't get stopped by.
It is an example of white privilege, but to your point, which is you're changing the topic, and I'm fine with that. But I mean, this is exactly what the problem in our society is. We're stereotyping. We're taking a particular individual and stereotyping a whole group of people based on the behavior of one. And that's where it becomes problematic. Yeah. But you do have to ask, if there are a whole bunch of people who are African American and they continue to experience this on an ongoing basis, then you have to ask the question, what is it then we can structurally change about law enforcement that would allow us to not have that kind of encounter?
Yeah, we need to have better, more rigorous application process for those cops.
That would be a great example of a possible solution. Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to armchair quarterback from here, right here. Just say, we can do this.
That's what I hear you. And that's what I don't want either, because it's so easy for me to sound like it's easy, and it's not.
No, not at all.
But my only point about white privilege is that I don't think I was really aware till a couple of years ago how deeply, deeply privileged a person I am, just because of my color and my gender and even my education. I can sometimes, I ain't gonna lie, I was stopped here because I had just a couple extra drinks too many one night, and my wife was with me, and the officer stopped me, and he said, "You've been drinking, haven't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "How much did you have to drink?" And I said, "Well, I had..."
Not enough.
yeah, not enough.
I like that one.
That's a good. That was good. I said I had a bottle of wine. My wife and I shared it, and he says, "Did you have anything to eat?" And I said, "Yeah, we had some falafel." And I thought, "Great, I'm in Williamson County, and I'm saying I'm eating falafel, right?" No, I was eating a steak.
Yeah.
But anyway, he said, "How big a bottle of wine?"
The bigger the better.
But boy. I mean, here's what I'm hearing him saying. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't want to judge that guy, because that guy was great to me. I felt like he was giving me, like, you have an opportunity here to say you had a small bottle of wine.
Yeah.
I said, "No, it was a regular bottle of wine."
Yeah.
And he says, "Well, I'm going to need to have you step out of the car." So, okay. I mean, and then I'm going, ethics professor at Concordia. Yeah. Right?
Great, now I got to stand.
Yeah, right. But I did whatever he asked, and then he says, "Drive straight home."
Yeah.
And then as I was driving home, I'm going, would that happen to everybody in Williamson County, or not?
Yeah. So I got a story too. I got when I was younger, I got pulled over by a state trooper, and I was coming home from some questionable acts, we'll say, and my shirt was off, and I shouldn't have been driving, and I got pulled over by a state trooper, and he was white, and I was Mexican, and I said, I'm screwed right now, and he just told me to go home.
Oh, well.
It's just, I think, it's all case specific, I guess. Yeah. And I don't know, playing the devil's advocate too, your friend that got stopped, Is that a high crime area that they would treat everybody the same way?
I don't know. I don't know enough about the story. In fact, it's not even a friend. It was just he spoke here to us and about some of these issues, right? But I do believe, though, that I've gotten certain advantages that I never have had to address or deal with. I mean, I even knew it. So when I was a pastor, I used to wear a collar. And a lot of times I go to McDonald's and people would ask me before anyone else in front of me, they'd ask me what I wanted. And it's like, these people are in front of me. Yeah. Right? Well, that's not fair. Yeah. So then I wonder, well, does my race ever do that? And I mean, based on my reading, and based on other people's experiences, I mean, this is where I think those of us who are white need to listen to the experiences of those who are not white, to have them tell me what their experience is. Yeah.
I think that's true, and I think white privilege is a thing. Like, I feel like it is easier for me to do things, and there are stories of friends of mine that, like, their parents taught them how to speak to cops, to not, like, you know, go to jail like as soon as you get pulled over, because it's like a thing in black culture. It's like, hey, you know, just answer the questions, look at them straight in the eyes. Don't run, like just you know, random things. And I've heard it from multiple friends that's like, hey, you know, you need to do this. Like, and that's not a talk I had, you know, with my mom or dad. So,
right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to mention on this white privilege thing. I found it's a really interesting list by Peggy McIntosh. You can look it up on the internet, and she's got a white privilege checklist, and she's got 50 items here.
Holy cow.
That she said, and I'll just read a few of them just so you get a sense of what it is. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. If I want to, I can be pretty sure of finding a publisher for this piece on white privilege. I can be casual about whether or not to listen to another person's voice in a group in which he or she is the only member of his or her race. And she's got other things. I mean, these are really subtle things. These are not really obvious. And what I'm not getting at is that the society is somehow all intentionally trying to keep. I mean, the people think that racism is intentional, but I think we can even be prejudicial. I mean, if you want to call it, I mean, this is where people disagree about what racism means, but we can discriminate and we can make judgments of people unfairly just because of their color, and we do it unconsciously. I mean, I even do it unconsciously, and I'd be dumb not to admit that I do. Does that make me a bad person? No, but it does mean I'm capable of being as discriminatory as another human being when I'm totally unaware of what the issues are. And that's why I think the education piece is so important to talk about. Yeah. Because the more people are aware, the more we have the power to change it. But if we keep squelching it, then we're going to perpetuate.
And it's good it's good that you're able to recognize it and learn from there. That's the real problem, is when you don't want to learn anymore. You can recognize it, and I really like how you said, you know, you went and looked more into it, and you were like, oh my gosh, there's so much things I didn't know, and I was treating people a little differently from my misunderstandings. So I was actually curious to hear some other things that you learned, because I'm pretty sure our listeners probably don't know them either.
Okay. Well,
if you don't mind.
No, not at all. Well, one thing that I did, I'm embarrassed to even say it. So.
Well, it is going to be embarrassing, because that's when you don't know, but that's fine. Right?
I own it, and I want people to know. But I mean, I have not taken people's names seriously in class. Just, you know, I mentioned that other person who does that, but I've done that too. Yeah. Right. And now I really work hard. I really work hard at trying to learn people, because a lot of people change their names so that their Anglo profs, or so their English-speaking profs can pronounce them, right?
Oh, yeah. That's funny.
Right? And it's like, I want people to, I'll call you however you want to be called. But why did you have to change your name just to fit in, right? And I understand why. But another thing is that, let's say we're talking about, I teach Mexican-American history. So let's say we're in a particular spot, we're talking about the history of Mexican Americans in Texas. And I turned to one of my Mexican American students saying, did you ever hear this at home? Well, that's not really fair to ask a question of particular person that I'm assuming is Mexican American, but they could be Cuban American, they could be Puerto Rican American, they could be El Salvadoran American.
Yeah, don't call Cuban Mexican.
No, I know that would be very dangerous.
They don't like that.
No, but my point here is that it's so interesting, right? Is that this is the mistake I made? Is that you begin to I already am stereotyping someone because they have a little darker skin, and maybe they're Arab American, right? So this is something I've learned is that when we're talking about slavery, you don't look at the African American in the class, right? Because it's just not what you do. Does that mean you avoid the topic? No. Yeah. And if people want to share, you invite everyone to share, but you don't force people to talk about their background unless they're comfortable doing it. But I used to want to push the conversation, and you need to be. Does that make sense?
No, it does.
Yeah.
What I find it in today's world. I'm not defending, but I find it hard, and Mike and I talk about this all the time too. I find it almost hard to be white today, and you're kind of saying it right now, where you have to tiptoe around conversations where you can call it Mexican privilege or color privilege. I don't have that worry.
Right.
I can say almost whatever I want, and not in a demeaning way, but I think we're almost moving too far as a society to where we can't talk about things, to where people that are white feel uncomfortable about talking about stuff. You know what I mean?
It's called white fragility.
What is that called?
It's called white fragility.
White fragility.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, because I think that is true, because I've felt that. But I have to pull back and say, why am I feeling this? And the reason I'm feeling it is because I'm uncomfortable with the topic, and I don't want to do any more study on it. I feel like I've been trying. I feel like I mean, this is also the myth. I'm colorblind. If you're colorblind, you're really not, because it's kind of like, oh yeah, I don't notice people's gender. Come on, Freud says it's the first thing you notice in another person is whether they're male or female, right? You're gonna notice you're gonna notice who they are. I mean, you could be wrong, but
yeah.
And the white fragility is this, and I don't believe that everyone is that way. But by and large, white people are really uncomfortable talking about race because they feel like they're going to get shamed, or they're going to get blamed, or they're going to get whatever, right? Or they're afraid they're going to offend someone. And guess what? I've done that a lot.
Yeah.
But the other thing is I just then help me learn. And I think I've had my African-American friends and my Latino friends tell me, Carl, I'm happy to help you. But you got to do one thing for me first. You got to go read about this stuff first. Can you do your own study first about this topic and your own history before you come ask me? Don't place your anxiety about race on me. Please do your own study and then come to me with questions and ask me, because I'm happy to talk about it.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah,
strong.
That makes a good point, right?
Yeah.
It's complicated. It's complicated.
I hadn't done my own study, right? And so then I realized, I got to do my own study about how African Americans are experiencing X, Y, or Z, or how, right, and what's happening in a classroom and how people are experiencing it.
Yeah.
I know here one of the things against critical race theory is they're tired of, having their kids come to class and be shamed about, the history of slavery in America. And it's like, well, shaming isn't the answer. These kids didn't have anything to do with slavery. But the problem is that all of us in our culture and society have received certain messages, including our kids. And it's not an attempt to shame or blame. It's an attempt to, again, inform in a way that hopefully is non-judgmental. But it also motivates us to change to be better people.
Yeah.
And I see this next generation. There's a lot more accepting of information and diverse, and just they all love each other. It seems like it's very different from even our generation. We're in our 30s. Where do you see it going with this more open-minded generation? Do you still hear the talks of racism in the classroom and things like that?
Sure.
It's still strong.
Yeah, we talk about it, and it's something that, if you're a good teacher, you're letting the material drive the discussion rather than your own personal issues. If that makes sense.
Yeah, because I've noticed with this younger generation, it's like, when we were in school, it was like a group mentality, like you were saying. We're not going to go against the grain. We're going to stay with the group. But these generation, they're speaking out. They want to bring up things and break down barriers and things like that. So this generation is a little different. I feel like, at least through my eyes.
Well, they have social media. They have other
Social
platforms
media,
that
yeah.
we didn't have.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's another reason why they're loud.
Yeah, and I mean, I genuinely believe that every generation has its strengths and it has its weaknesses, character-wise. And this generation, you've talked about some very positive qualities. I'm sure that because of social media, it's going to also create some new kinds of problems that they're totally unaware of, and that they're going to have to work to solve.
Yeah.
And they didn't even know they were creating the problem in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Right. I still remember even one of the older professors here one time was saying, "Oh, you kids and your social media and all that kind of stuff." And one of those students got up and said, "Well, you're the generation who invented it and then gave it to us and sold it to us. So I think you're the one
You're
to
to blame. I love that when kids do that.
But I mean, the point is that, you know what? It's a mutual thing.
Yeah.
Right? It isn't just a one-way street. It isn't blaming the other generation, right? It's like, so what's my part in this? Yeah.
And this new generation recognizes that, whereas when I was younger and looking at my parents, I wasn't like, well, this is what you did to me. It's like they recognize it at this level in this time in life. It's I wonder, since we're on the topic, social media has a big play in this topic as well. I almost think it's, I don't know, it's good and bad, I guess, but like those situations where behind closed doors things were happening, like a lot with cops and things like that. But it also goes both ways. But you're able to turn your phone on and kind of scare people that would normally misuse their power. Yeah. And highlight it in that way. What do you think about social media in this topic?
So one of the kind of fundamental principles that I have believed for a long time is that whatever you have that is of value to you or a gift to you can be used to help or can be used to destroy. And so creating something new doesn't necessarily solve a problem, because people are going to find a new way to use the new thing to both make humanity better and make it worse. So I don't think inventing things, it's the ethical question about how you're going to use it. The problem I have with social media is that I just don't think it's a neutral category. In other words, if I need to use a shovel, let's say use a tool imagery. If I need to use a shovel, it isn't like the shovel is, I'm in the middle of the night going, gotta go down and get that shovel. I gotta go dig a hole, man. I just want to do that, right? Unfortunately, my social media is blinking and beeping, right? And it's waking me up, and I'm going, oh, this is what's going on here, right? And the point is that these are not neutral tools. A shovel's a neutral tool because I get to choose when I use it and when I need it, and it's helpful when I need it. I hate digging with my hands. But this social media and our phones are like going to control us unless we take control of it, and that means somehow. I mean, I try not to take my phone in my classroom, right? Just because I don't even want the stupid thing to buzz in my pocket, because I'm going to be tempted to pull it out and look at it. Yeah. Right? And it's those kinds of habits that I think we're going to need to somehow develop. I mean, I'm not on any social media. Other than I'm on YouTube because of the TV show that I'm on. But I just said, this is silly. I don't have the time for this. I'd rather sit down and read a book or even watch a good, television program than do all that. That's just not, I just found that I couldn't maintain my identity anymore. Because I have friends who are very conservative. I have friends who are very liberal. I have friends who are in the middle. I have people from all walks of life. And guess what? I just really do not want, I'm going to be that myself in the presence of them. But I can't hold a social media presence that is the same for everybody. Because all of a sudden, well, how come you made that liberal comment? Or how come you made that conservative comment? It's because I'm a way more diverse person and I'm way more complex than any kind of social media presentation of myself. And I just decided 10 years ago, I'm out. I don't want that pressure.
I feel like a lot of people are in the middle. The more and more people we talk to, just on the podcast and about the podcast and, whatever, there's a lot of people in the middle. But it's almost like you have to pick a side if you're on social media.
You do, yeah.
You and then social media curates what you view. So then you share what you're viewing on social media. So if you're a conservative and you're following Trump and you like something on Trump, then Facebook starts giving you that information. And then you live in this world that is curated by TikTok or Facebook, and then it fills up your head. And if you don't step back a bit and kind of realize like, okay, but I guess my point is, I think a lot of people are right in the middle with us. But it doesn't seem that way on social media.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, and the tragedy of that being fed stuff, right, is you're no longer free. You really can't pick what you want because someone's actually picking it for you.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's always been the case of media companies. They've always done that. But, I mean, certain media companies have always, I think, done a better job than other media companies. I mean, I love reading, like, for instance, the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. One leans conservative, one leans liberal, but they're just both great. To me, they're great papers.
Yep.
They curate well. They give me what I need to know, and they let me know when they are different from one another. It's like, oh, I see what's going on here, and that's helpful to me to know both sides.
Definitely. Do you go to the Drudge Report?
No, I don't.
No?
No.
What is the Drudge? Is that a right or left wing?
I think that's right.
Is it?
Yeah, as I recall.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that I saw it listed at one time as one of these more fringe, right? Fringe, I don't want to say that necessarily. I don't know where they're at, but it isn't. I'm really trying to keep kind of in the middle.
What's a good place to get in the middle real news these days?
Well, to me, the one, I really love Reuters.
Yeah.
Reuters is just it's an international organization. It doesn't give you the U.S. point of view on everything. It gives you a kind of global view. And I just find that it feels very nonpartisan to me. And I mean, I did a little bit of research on it, and so Reuters I like Reuters. I follow them every day.
Do you like the Associated Press?
I mean, for the most part, yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to say because that's not my area of study, first of all. But I do know I've seen people who've analyzed where different editorial policies fall on these different, and I tend to eliminate anyone who's.
Yeah,
right.
It's so hard to do that though.
It is, and I mean, I ain't gonna lie, it's kind of fun sometimes to read, right? The people
because you can tell.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, okay.
You can tell real quick.
Yeah. But some of it is who's got the time for all of that.
No,
I mean,
this guy.
Yeah.
I try to read, like I'll go to Fox and then I'll read CNN stuff,
Sure.
and then I'll try to like make up my own decision in the middle.
Sure, sure.
But it's hard to get news as a someone who doesn't have a whole lot of time. If I just want to stay up to date with the news cycle, it's hard to find just nonpartisan information.
It is, and I don't, as much as my wife and I used to watch the just the evening news, right? The mainline evening news, and I don't even there. It's like you're telling me a major story, and it's like, well, we need to pull away for the next, series of medical ads, right? Because it's my age group that's watching it. So, my point is that the other thing I don't like is these short stories that don't go into any analysis. They don't do any interview, and I also don't like aggregators.
Yeah.
Because I want to pay the people who are actually doing the news and getting the story and all of that, rather than the people who are just pulling from all these areas and then trying to sell the product as if it's theirs and it isn't.
I think that's why podcasts are getting so big now with all the independent news journalists.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not fake. And it's like kind of how we started the conversation of the podcast. We just like to talk and have open-ended discussions and bring the facts in.
Yeah.
I think that's why a good reason why podcasts are getting popular.
I think it's also good for all of us to know what our biases are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll admit my biases, so I'm probably, certain kinds of reading kind of keys me up a little bit more than other kinds of reading. But I think some of it, again, is if you're not aware of stuff, then you can't change. And the thing is, I always want to change with what fundamentally an ethical person. I really want to change according to my ethics and what I believe in. And I realize that I'm not trying to pit groups against one another, because I think it's a matter of priorities of what you think what your values are. For instance, classically, right? it was always believed that freedom was a bad thing because freedom bred chaos in a society. So freedom was looked down on. Well, now we're in a series where freedom is a really good thing, right?
Yeah.
But then we have disorder. So what's the greater value, order or freedom? And I mean, those are always in tension in a society. And I think parties often gravitate around important good values, but they disagree with one another over how those things get acted out.
I appreciate that you recognized a fault, or maybe not a fault, but maybe a gap or something that you recognize within yourself, because a lot of people would say people in your age group you can't
Change.
you can't change. You can't, what's that old adage? You can't train a dog when you can't.
Oh, you
what is
can't,
it?
yeah.
Can't teach a dog new
You
tricks.
can't teach a dog. Yeah, a lot of people would say that, but you recognized that that you had a gap to fill, and you went out and you changed it.
Yeah, and I've changed my ethical positions. Frequently. It's not like I'm constantly changing. I probably have a fairly stable belief system, but hey, I have changed over time. I would not be happy with I'm not happy with my high school self.
Yeah.
Right.
How long have you been a college professor?
Since '97.
Okay.
Yeah. I was a pastor first down the border, worked in Spanish, which was transformative for me because, what I learned about Mexico and the border in central Minnesota wasn't true. Or it just wasn't complete. Maybe that's a better way to put it. It was not a full picture.
In what regard?
I think that when you live on the border, you realize how many of the people you encounter. So I grew up with a kind of narrative that, that the Mexican is lazy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I never heard
That's
that.
the complete opposite. Even like some older white people I talk to, like older people, they're like, the Mexicans get it.
That has shifted because that has shifted. And so, this is a completely different perception. It's like, and the other thing is that it isn't like people choose, I choose to live this particular way. You realize that they're victims of certain circumstances that they are out of control of. And they're doing the best they can. They're working hard. And now that they're working hard, they don't have time to get education. And if you don't have time to get education, then you got to stay in that same low-paying job, which means that, unless you're in something that's going to move you up, and then you're kind of stuck there the rest of your life, right? So you realize that it isn't like people just decide, I think I want to do this the rest of my life. That people are victims of their circumstance. They have opportunity to change, but not everyone does.
Yeah.
Right? And so, yeah, I feel bad even saying what I just said, but that was the prejudice.
But you don't believe it. That's just what it was there, right?
Yeah. Even I still remember my dad saying, "Where did that even come from? Where did that even come from?" He says, "That's not my experience at all." And I said, "Well, it was implied on. There's a lot of reasons behind it. Culturally, there was the siesta." Yeah. Which is really not about laziness. It was about you don't work in the heat of the day. You work early in the morning, you work late at night when it's cool, and you sleep during the day and take your rest then. Yeah. So then you get the stereotype, right, of the culture that has a siesta is lazy. So, these are the cultural things that play in, and then you associate it with race, right, and ethnicity. And now we've got already a beginning of, prejudice and that.
Yeah, is that what inspired you to teach this history in the school?
Yeah, it did. That's why it was transformative, because it was like I want to dig down. I want to go way down, look at Mexican American history, look at Mexican history, and when you understand some of that, it's just like what you see is amazing. One classic piece. We had someone here at Concordia. It was really interesting. Someone said, "So when did your family?" She was Mexican American. "When did your family come to the United States?" And she said, "We were always here." "When did you come?" Because you have to remember that a lot of people who were Mexican, the border jumped over them. They didn't cross any border. The border jumped over them. And then they're blamed for coming across the border. Yeah. Well, let me tell you, if you have a whole bunch of people here who have a bunch of families and the border jumps over them, why would you be surprised that the families keep coming? Because families love to be together, and they're going to go where there's opportunity.
Yeah. What are some, from your learning from before you before your last practice, what were some of the learnings you did after you become educated on the subject?
Of
Like some misconceptions
of like immigration or of
the history of
Mexico.
Mexico, yeah.
I think that probably the one of the things about the history of Mexico that I think Americans, people in the United States, don't understand. I have to be careful because Mexico is a part of America, right? It's part of North America,
Right.
right? As is Canada. So that's why it's funny that in the United States we call ourselves Americans, but South Americans are Americans too.
Yeah.
Anyway, is that their history is completely different than the United States. In the United States, we have a very unique history about the Enlightenment thinkers like Jefferson, right, and Locke, and some of them establishing some of the kind of fundamental principles about how we live. And then, of course, a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of the model of the Constitution and how we're organized came from the Confederation of the Indigenous Tribes, and they took their governing structure and they applied that to our Constitution. Mexico is very different. It was conquered by Hernan Cortés, who basically used, what resources he had to essentially enslave the Aztecs and the indigenous peoples. And it was a forced, essentially they killed the men and raped many of the women, right? And so it's a very different, they were conquistadors who were men only. Those in North America came, and they came with their families. They for religious freedom and other reasons, but they were agricultural. They brought their women and they had children. The conquistadors initially did not. It was more a military state, right? And so and then it was a monarchy for so long. So the political knowledge and institutions are very different from one another. And Mexico always looked at, should we use Spain and the monarch as our model, or should we use the United States as our model? And people are not aware of that kind of fight that goes on in Mexico.
No.
Because here's the thing is that as the United States conquers territory in Mexico, people are going, why would we use the United States as our model? They took over half of our land. Yeah, we should go back to Spain and use that. But they're going, yeah, but authoritarianism and monarchy isn't the way we should go. We should also have a democracy. So they have a very different struggle than the United States did.
And that's less talked about too, huh?
Yeah, it's less talked about. Yeah, so that's why, because I hear people say, well, how come Mexico just can't get it together, right? Like the United States. Well, it's because they have a completely different history.
That's a whole nother topic too.
That's another topic. Yeah.
How have you seen the education system change? And you said you've been teaching over 25 years now. Mm-hmm. How has it changed? Has it gotten worse or better? It seems like university professors have a big spotlight on them now with everything going on, especially in Texas.
Yeah.
Has it changed for the better? Has it gotten worse? What are your thoughts on that?
Plato said that he hated all of his young students because they were just not as good anymore, right? They didn't have the edge that. And the complaint about students by teachers and professors is a constant one, and which is why I often don't like to do any kind of comparison like that. I would just say that things get better and better and worse all the time. There are new challenges. With phones, you have whole new challenges about cheating and people's access to information, which then forces you to have to think, well, what is it that we're doing when we educate? Are we trying to get students to memorize a certain series of information, or are we trying to get them to think? I always tell my students, I'm not trying to feed you. So I'm trying to create hunger so that you know where to go to feed yourself, because that's what learning is, right?
Yeah.
It's just the ongoing.
That's what college is in general, right? Like teaching people how to critically think, right? Because they're obviously not going to remember everything.
No, you can't.
Right?
That's why Google's there.
Right. Does school know about Chegg?
Chegg?
Yeah.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Coursera? You name them all.
Yeah. What? Are y'all fighting back? Are universities fighting on Chegg? Because you can just cheat your ass off on Chegg.
Yeah, you can, and the school is aware of it, and they have had meetings. I think this is particularly problematic in areas like particularly credentialed areas. For instance, if you're cheating on hate to say it, but let's say you're cheating on my history class. what are the consequences? You're cheating on my history class. Well, first of all, the consequence is going to be you because you're saying you learned something and you really didn't.
Yeah.
Right? You cheated, which is more about your moral character than it is about my teaching.
You're cheating yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
But the consequences of people not knowing their Mexican history as well as another person probably isn't going to be as great as one of our nursing students who is cheating on all of their exams to pass, and then they're taking care of you.
Yeah. That's scary.
Right?
Right.
So, and my point is that cheating has, I think, greater consequences for society in certain areas than it does in others. In terms of your own effect on yourself, it's the same moral problem. You're like any kind of cheating. It's like, well, yeah, oh yeah, I'm going to do the quick exercise rather than doing the regular. Yeah, okay, well, all right, then the consequences will all come out.
Yeah.
But
I think it was Texas A&M last year that there was a bunch of students in a math class. Like the teacher had to fail the entire class because someone ratted the students out and came forward. I imagine there's a lot of fight from public universities against those websites, right?
I think that, yeah, and there would be one private as well, because it's cheating.
Yeah.
And you always have to stand against it. And so it's a cat and mouse game about how you can stay ahead. I mean, some of us, the way I've handled it for me is that, first of all, I say, hey, you can write down any notes you want and bring it into class. Because I'm not doing a state certified exam. Because here's the thing, is that when people actually, and it's got to be handwritten, I said, when you write down those notes, guess what's happening?
You're remembering.
You're learning the material. Mm-hmm. So that you actually accomplish my goal by writing it down and bringing it into class. And if you actually need it to help, besides, you can't write everything down you wrote on your card anyway, so you're going to have to use some analysis. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that. Now, there may be other profs that aren't. That's fine. But the other thing is that in the humanities, you can often ask questions that there's no answer on Chig for.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
there definitely is. I know those.
Oh, my God. Oh, all right. Okay,
yeah, he's that guy.
Yeah.
Huh?
What's the meaning of life?
No, listen to this guy.
How has COVID long-term impacted higher education?
No clue. Meaning,
just right now, though.
Just right now?
Yeah.
Were you already structured for online education, or did y'all have to become structured?
We had to
from
become
the
structured. We had some online classes, so those continued as usual, but we had to learn to do the high flex, what we called a high flex model, in which we would teach virtually and have students would be virtual, but you would teach in real time, right? But you'd be using electronic resources through your learning management system. And so a lot of us had to learn how to do that, which, the benefit is that I know how to use a lot of tools that I didn't know how to use before, and now I can use them in my regular classes. I think that it's probably more an emotional toll on the mental health of the students. I think that's probably more an issue, meaning I don't think everyone's completely recovered about what it is to live in community again and how to behave in a group and how to not be isolated. I think COVID caused a lot of depression.
Yeah.
I think it caused a lot of mental health issues to arise for students, and they don't know how to do it, and they were isolated. And when they come back, I know that our mental health services here are overwhelmed, right? Mm-hmm. So then you're going, okay, is this everywhere? It appears to be everywhere. And so what's changed in my teaching now is I really spend time going, hey, how y'all doing? Let's spend 10 minutes, just ask, how you feeling?
That's good.
Right? Because even talking even a little bit about it helps people push through it. And it's like, well, is that really part of what I'm here for, is to do that? But it's like, yeah, it is, because if they're in a better mental state, they're going to learn better.
Yeah, exactly. I think you don't get a lot of professors that way, at least, and especially not, Mike and I are taking online courses, so it's hard to get that personal touch.
Yeah.
Do you see online schooling being more prevalent as the years go on?
No, I think that it's going to settle out. It's a lot like ebooks and physical books. You have this library here, and everyone says, oh, these physical books are going to disappear. Guess what? Ebooks really rose, and then now they're going down again, or people are buying physical books. And I think that there's always going to be the people who love ebooks and the people who love physical books. And guess what? It's just going to be two different things. And some people, I know some students who love online stuff. They do not like being in the classroom, They love the online, and other students say, I do not ever want to take another online class in my life.
Yeah.
And I think that everyone's got to figure out where they learn best.
Yeah, it's different. Even though, a book and an ebook are different. They just don't feel right.
That Control F on the ebook?
Oh,
Control Find?
That's really helpful for school. I always pick the ebook because I can find the information quicker, whereas the glossary and looking at each individual word is for the bees. I think that's like an evolutionary step that was good. Yeah.
Well, see, and I always create my own glossaries. I mean, what I do is when I write, I always try to pull out the notes, the kind of key ideas that I like, and I have them all right there in the back of the book. So that way, when I come back and go, oh yeah, that thought, and then it's usually, I don't have to go look up and flip through the pages. I go through my glossary in the back, and there's, it's on page 17 is where that is.
But Control F,
Yeah, but well, I mean, fair. I mean, if I'm looking for a specific word and how it's used everywhere, that's great.
Yeah.
But usually, I'm not trying to find words. I'm trying to find an idea that's complex that you can't do a Control F for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I wish it didn't.
Yeah.
But this thing I really do have passion for is like the way you teach is very important. Every class is different. I mentioned this on the last couple podcasts. Have you ever messed with Duolingo?
A little bit, not much.
That teaches you another language.
Yep, I've messed up with it.
And then there's
I've messed up with it too.
Yeah. And then there's like Khan Academy, which has a lot of good stuff for every subject.
No, it's awesome.
And the way you learn it's like, I forget the exact term. It's like, I don't think it's implicit learning. It's something like that. But anyways, you're learning without even know you're learning. Mm-hmm. And it's quick, and it's like, I don't know. I think that approach can be applied everywhere, and we can learn a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And some of these other things are just like busy work stuff that some of our classes provide no value. I mean, like we get done with them, we're like, man, I didn't learn anything. And I think it's just a class to make up a curriculum.
Right.
You know?
Right. And that hurts my soul too, because I would want every class to be that where people go, man, I need to dig into this. This is fascinating material, and yet you're getting pushed, right? Rather than just kind of delivering the goods and all of that. And the way I use stuff like that is like, okay, let's go watch this then. You watch it, right? Let's come back and let's talk about it. So instead of taking the class to spend the time delivering the information, you get the information from Khan Academy, and let's come back and let's talk about it. What does it mean?
That would be good.
That'd be really good.
That'd be
See, that's what they call a flipped classroom, where you have, instead of doing the classic classroom with the movies going and all of that, right? It's like, why waste class time together watching something you can do individually?
Yeah.
Have you heard of Brian McLogan?
No.
He's a YouTube professor, but he teaches math stuff.
Oh.
And he quit teaching. I think he was a high school teacher, right? He quit teaching high school because he would video his classroom lectures, and then over the years he started having a lot of momentum on his YouTube channel, and you see all the comments and the way he teaches. He has this charisma about him that he's able to convey the message really well, and it's able to click. And he's saved my butt a few times in math classes, but not just me, just a lot of different people. But I feel like you have that same charisma about you in class, where you're able to convey the message in a fun way. And there's not a lot of teachers like that, you know, where the school is just kind of like, they're probably not happy in their job. They probably don't even like it anymore. So they're just going for the paycheck. Yeah. Just kind of spitting out this information for the student just to get through the day, you know?
Right. But, yeah. And it's like everything, right? It's some people just need the training, and it would transform them. I mean, the first day I sat in the classroom, I was already buying about 4 books on how to teach well, like what makes things meaningful, right? I would hope that every teacher or professor does that, but not everyone does, right?
They're not all the same too, right?
No, they're no. Yeah, right.
And that's why I do my research before I pick a teacher, because, I mean, some of them aren't going to apply that. You need to be reached, And then online, some of our teachers teach 1,000 students at a time, and it's just TAs are grading, and you're just watching these videos that are outdated, and it's like, man, what am I doing?
Yeah, and you're paying money for it, right?
We're doing that though in our situation because we have jobs that require an education that we already do.
Oh yeah.
So we're kind of stuck. Not to say we're not learning as we're going along, but there's a lot of not learning as well.
Right. So. Well, you're learning how to. Yeah, I mean, you're learning how not to teach,
Yeah, it's true.
right?
Yeah, I got on a tangent last week, boy. I told Mike, I said, I think going to school, and you're gonna laugh, you're gonna think I'm an idiot, but you probably already do. But I was like, going to school now to learn this material I think is making me dumber. And let me tell you my reason.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in what you mean.
All right. So in my job, right, I work for a corporation that has policies and procedures to do stuff, right? And without this engineering degree, and same with you, I've learned and we've excelled in this position to where we've learned everything that we possibly can, right? And we've advanced with digital technologies at work. We've implemented special projects and stuff like that, and it's been a wow factor inside the company. And these new engineers coming out of school, we train them for the position. You know, we train them how to take that critical thinking skills that they learned in school and actually apply them in a real world.
Yeah.
And we were able to go off by ourselves at work and teach ourselves other stuff to apply at work.
Yeah.
Without knowing trigonometry or whatever. You know what I mean? Just saying class, that's what I'm taking right now.
Right.
But learning that, going back and learning this information that those kids coming out know, feel like I'm dumbing myself down and not able to grow and keep up with the technology as it's changing.
Yeah, I see.
You know what I mean? So I'm spending time learning stuff that probably is probably value added, obviously, but I'm not able to grow and keep thriving like I was as an employee.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense
no,
at all?
that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
He's like, you're an
totally
idiot.
No, not at all. No, and I mean, I think it's going to be unique for every individual. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I mean, we often tell students too. So just remember, your major gets you your first job, but your liberal arts kind of foundation, those first 2 years of college, that gets you every job after that. And
what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
So, well, what I mean is that what you're trying to do by making people well-rounded is that you have the capability of shifting and pivoting and doing anything you really want. Because if you have enough kind of understanding how historical theory goes, and you have enough sociological theory, and you understand how psychology works, and you get a good communications class, you can go in, you can be a communications director at a company like yours, or maybe you could be the company archivist if you had a history degree, or you could go to another company, or if you took ethics, right, or philosophy, you learn, how to think about broader ethical issues for society and the implications in the organization. Because the place you work is always going to train you to do the specific job they want. Colleges and universities can never teach you the specific skills you need in your first job.
Right.
They just can't. There's too many jobs out there, right? So what they have to do is train people how to learn. How to learn and also to create the hunger and the curiosity so that you know exactly how to attack what you need to learn. Does that make sense?
Oh, perfect sense.
You have an application in this place?
Well, Dr. Trovall, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How do I say it?
Trovall, you got it right.
I feel like I'm going to butcher it every time.
No, you're good.
Well,
even if you did, it'd be fine.
We greatly appreciate your time. And time.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me. I appreciate it.
It's been fun. So just for everyone's awareness, I know we met through my sister-in-law, who also teaches here. Is she doing a good job here?
She does a great job.
Are you sure?
Tell us the real.
Yeah, give us the details.
We're letting her go next week.
No, yeah, she does an excellent job.
She's so smart.
She is very smart, and she, the thing is that just some of her stuff, I still remember what she wrote for me in my class, in my ethics class, and she's just so insightful about things. And the other thing I love about your sister-in-law is she cares so deeply about people. She reminds me that it's really. You can talk about all the information and all that, but really at a place like this, we're here because we want to develop the people.
Yeah.
Right? We want them to be compassionate. We want them to be leaders. We want them to be critical thinkers and to make the society a better place.
She,
and she's one of them.
I remember her when I was living at my parents' house and her going through her master's degree and her PhD and just spending so much time doing it. And she still does that. She still does that now with teaching students and stuff. My brother will post pictures of her working late at night, grading papers and providing feedback. So she 100% cares. So she's another one, a great professor that needs to be highlighted. So
yeah, I agree with you completely.
So, well, maybe we'll do this again. It was fun.
It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Do you, so you don't do any social media, right? No social media?
No, you don't need to. Yeah, there's no social media. So it's like,
we'll make some accounts for you. No,
that's fine. I mean, if there are people who want to send an email or something, it's carl.trovall@concordia.edu, and I'm always happy to respond to people if they have a question or they want to write or if they have a disagreement even, so that's fine too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate
All right,
it. All right. Thank you.